Chapter 71. What is your face getting red for? Gu Jingming's gaze swept astutely over the two people. He looked at them for a short while and smiled knowingly. Mu Wanqing immediately thought about Gu Jingming's marriage again. Jingming, look at how blissful your younger brother is now. You should hurry up and make arrangements to find one too. Mother, don't trouble yourself so much with my affairs. Anyway, you want a grandchild, so you should urge Jingze to try harder. That is more practical. Why did he drag her and Gu Jingze into this again? Lin Che quickly straightened her back in an awkward manner. Mu Wanqing hummed, that's not possible. You're older than both of them but you still haven't found a girlfriend. What is this? Lin Che knew that from the moment the president took up the office, many people would speculate about his marriage. However, Gu Jingming simply never worried about it. He had been in office for almost 3 years. Everyone began to wonder why Mr. President was still not married. Initially, no one brought this up in the open anymore. But coincidentally, another general election was being held again. Whether or not he could take up an additional term still depended on how the last months of this year would turn out. Thus, Gu Jingming's marriage was once again brought up as a topic for discussion. Thereafter, Mu Wanqing said directly, the room you'll be using tonight has already been tidied up. All right, I won't disturb you two any longer. Go back and rest. Don't chat too long with Jingming, Jingze. Lin Che will be very bored if she's left alone in the room. Lin Che immediately looked at Gu Jingze opposite her. They were staying here again. Knowing that the two brothers had not met for a long time and probably had a lot to talk about, Lin Che tactfully left this place first. As he watched Lin Che leave, Gu Jingming smiled and said to Gu Jingze, sister-in-law seems not that bad. Gu Jingze sighed. Still, we were forced into this. Gu Jingming broke into a smile. He gazed at Gu Jingze. From what I see right now, not everything is because it was forced. You mean that you're also forced to treat her well? Gu Jingze said, since I married her, she's my wife. I should treat her a little better. She's only 23 years old. This kind of marriage life is slightly too unfair for her, especially if I don't treat her well. Gu Jingming looked away in deep thought and did not speak. However, Gu Jingming suddenly thought of something and asked, that day, you called to ask me about a person, I forgot her name. Who accidentally crashed into the convoy of the Glass Palace? The president's residence was called the Glazed Tile Palace, so the convoy was also accordingly called the Glazed Tile Palace Convoy. They were the strictest security guards by the president's side. Gu Jingze recalled the events of that day. That's right, she was Lin Che's manager. Did she cause you any alarm that day? Gu Jingming's eyes paused before turning slightly colder. No. That's good. What's her name? Yu Minmin, I think, Gu Jingze said. Gu Jingming nodded his head, his attitude still cryptic. The two of them talked about important matters for a short while before returning to their respective rooms. Gu Jingming watched Gu Jingze leave and said to his general secretary beside him, go and investigate Yu Minmin. Ensure that she didn't leave any trace of what happened that day. The general secretary naturally understood him. He nodded before taking his leave. Lin Che had paced up and down the room for a long time. It was only when she heard the door move that she jumped directly down from the bed. When she saw Gu Jingze enter, Lin Che shouted at Gu Jingze with a red face, Gu Jingze, what were you doing just now? Gu Jingze's face was completely neutral. What did I do just now? Looking at him feign innocence, Lin Che yelled even more angrily, you were touching me secretly under the table. Gu Jingze sat down and raised his head to look at Lin Che. So what? You were taking liberties with me. Gu Jingze shrugged and said, I did that to make our married life appear more realistic. Lin Che was completely dumbstruck. In that case, your performance just now was natural enough. Gu Jingze smiled and said, you were very natural too. No. My acting skills are bad. I wasn't as natural as you were. Gu Jingze raised his eyebrows. He smiled and said, so what you mean is that your earlier expressions were your genuine reactions. Then, when your face got red, it was a natural response. At his remark, Lin Che's face began to redden even more. Whose face was red? Do you want me to get a mirror for you to look into? Gu Jingze said as he stood up and inched closer to her. Lin Che hurriedly took a few steps backward. No need. Lin Che really had to hand it to him. In that type of situation, he could actually still play his role so well. Even now, he acted so colorfully and rendered her unable to distinguish between what was real and what was not. She looked at Gu Jingze's pressing gaze as he smiled faintly. It was so deep that it seemed like he was about to look into her soul. She quickly went into the bathroom as an excuse. She was going to shower, change her clothes, sleep early, and leave this place quickly. In short, visiting the GU residence less often in the future was still more ideal. Even now, she seemed to still be able to feel his lingering touch at the base of her thigh. A shock of electricity streaked across and caused her to shake her head frantically to forget that feeling of intense passion. The next day, Lin Che followed the company to participate in the filming of National Winner, a popular variety program with extremely high viewer ratings. The company regarded this as a highly important matter, and Yu Minmin borrowed a very expensive piece of clothing on Lin Che's behalf. As she looked at the clothes and high-heeled shoes in the bag, Yu Minmin smiled and said, "These are really not bad. However, the GU family should have piles and piles of clothing that are more expensive than these." Lin Che said, "Really? But I don't really know how to look at brands, so I don't know which ones are expensive. Can sister you come over next time and help me look?" "Me? Forget it. Does the GU residence simply allow anyone to go in?" Can't you just go in whenever you want?" Lin Che was slightly astonished. Yu Minmin could not be bothered to explain to her. "Of course, you can casually go in. That's not the case for the rest of us. Alright, go get ready and do your makeup." Very soon after, Lin Che arrived at the television broadcast station. This program had an exclusive dressing room. Lin Che was very excited all the way and looked around everywhere. After some time, Lin Li arrived too. Upon seeing that Lin Che had actually come to participate in the program, she snorted and walked past Lin Che. "Now, this program has also downgraded. Any cat or dog can come and participate too." Lin Li's fairly loud voice traveled from behind her. Yu Minmin glanced at Lin Che and said to Lin Che as if she was merely making small talk, "I heard that Senmira just had all her schedules cancelled. I don't know if that's true or false. Someone saw her moonlighting at a small town. She even goes for events that pay 10,000 each. It seems like she really needs money." Behind them, Lin Li's expression changed immediately when she heard this. When she thought of Gu Jingze, her heart was indeed fearful. She snorted and raised her head haughtily. In her high heels, she walked out and said, "The air here is really bad. Let's go. We'll look for a private dressing room to do my makeup." Lin Li left noisily with her assistant in tow. Lin Che said, "Wherever she goes, she kicks up a fuss, seriously." Yu Minmin smiled. However, she saw that her phone was ringing. When she looked at the number, her heart jolted. Before leaving, she said to Lin Che that she was going out to answer a call. Yu Minmin only answered the call when she went outside. "Hello, how are you? Miss Yu, there are some things that I want to discuss with you a bit in person. If it's convenient for you, I can go look for you." Yu Minmin drew in a deep breath. "I already told you, that day was just an accident. I didn't have any ulterior plans. Can we meet in person to talk?" "Alright, if you're worried that I recorded your voice secretly, then let's just meet and talk." Inside, Lin Li sneaked glances at Lin Che inside. She was so angry that her face was completely green. She pulled her assistant beside her, over to her and said, "Look for Lin Che's clothes later. Do you see that bag of hers? The clothes she'll be wearing tonight are definitely inside. Later, just go in." Chapter 72. An accident occurred during filming. A short while later, in the dressing room, the assistant's small figure sneaked in quietly. And in the front, Lin Che had just finished doing her makeup. She heard the uproar coming from outside but could not find Yu Minmin anywhere. She could only ask the makeup artist what had happened. The makeup artist said, "The situation must be like this because Gu Jingyu arrived." Just as she was done speaking, sure enough, she saw Gu Jingyu directly push open the door to the dressing room and walk inside. It was the first time the makeup artist had ever seen Gu Jingze coming to the common dressing room. When she saw Gu Jingze, she beamed with happiness. And Gu Jingze came directly to Lin Che's side. He sat down, smiled, and said, "Hey, I see you've lost weight. Is it because you couldn't see me every day after filming ended so you became more and more emaciated from missing me?" Lin Che looked at him speechlessly. Beside them, the makeup artists were listening to their conversation. They did not expect Gu Jingze to actually be such a jokester. He was vastly different from the image they had of him prior to this. Furthermore, he was the kind of person who usually brought his personal stylist everywhere with him. He was not someone whom average makeup artists like them could come into contact with. All of them were very happy to be able to see Gu Jingze so closely this time. After some time, the director sent someone to tell them to hurry up because the recording was about to begin. Lin Che rushed to do the finishing touches on her makeup. Then, she put on the clothes that she had brought here herself. She was dressed in a short off-shoulder dress which had floral patterns embroidered on it. It was matched with stilettos below and made it extremely comfortable to look at. It was very suitable for participating in a variety program like this one. Gu Jingze patted her shoulder. "Do your best." Lin Che was still a little nervous. She drew in a deep breath before walking inside. In no time, the program began along with some music. Because Gu Jingze was here, the production team did not dare to take it too far. There were very few game segments and they mainly did an interview with Gu Jingze as the focal point. From the side, Lin Che saw Lin Li walk out as well. She glanced at Lin Che and snorted. With a haughty expression, she lifted her head. Then, all of the main production members came on stage. Lin Che stood on the tall stage as she looked at the fans and audience who filled the venue. They were cheering enthusiastically below. The huge lights were shining on Lin Che and they made her face heat up. Just when Lin Che was about to move forward, Lin Li pushed her quickly to the side. Lin Che blanked out. She still had very little experience on stage and momentarily did not really know how to best squeeze herself back in. Right at this moment, she felt Gu Jingze grab her firmly and pull her directly to stand beside him. The seasoned and experienced host there naturally noticed this incident immediately. He broke into a smile as he looked at the team of people lining up properly. His gaze swept over Lin Che and Gu Jingze. Earlier we noticed that when Jingze realized that Lin Che had no place to stand, he immediately pulled her over to the space beside him. Instantly the host made Gu Jingze and Lin Che the topic of conversation. From behind, Lin Li looked at Lin Che who was standing next to Gu Jingze. Her face was completely stiff. Lin Che's face showed her slight embarrassment at being talked about like this. Then, Gu Jingze said with poise, "It's Lin Che's first time on stage. She doesn't have a lot of experience. As her senior, I must give her a hand." The host said immediately, "Ayo, Jingze is so thoughtful. Lin Che, how about it? How does it feel to be cared for by Jingze?" Lin Che smiled and said, "It feels. I think that after the filming, I thought that I might be beaten to death by his fans. Is the security for your program good? Will you be responsible for sending me back later?" Upon hearing this, everyone proceeded to laugh. Lin Che seemed to gradually get a feel for this. Because the conversation revolved around Gu Jingze, there were consequently more topics of conversation involving her. For the most part of the interview, she actually had opportunities all the time. On the other hand, Lin Li only had a few. She was mentioned only during the introduction and again interviewed for a while regarding her recent engagement. Apart from that, she did not appear in many frames. Lin Li's complexion darkened out of anger. She glared at Lin Che who was laughing and joking in the front. When Lin Che was being interviewed, she spoke in a very lively and easygoing manner. It made people feel at ease. Seeing that the reactions to her interview were so good, Lin Li all the more could not help but think to herself, this was only because she had Gu Jingze's help, humph. Lin Li thought viciously, but you won't be able to enjoy it for too long. As she thought this, she glanced maliciously at Lin Che's stilettos. Now, the host instructed all of the main members of the production team to pick up the sweets in the basket altogether and distribute them to the audience down below. The audience immediately went into an uproar. They kept asking for sweets especially when they looked in Gu Jingze's direction. Lin Che had just grabbed a handful of sweets. When she threw them down, she already felt that something was wrong with her shoes. Frowning, she wanted to look down at it, but again, she did not have time to do so. When she grabbed a fistful of sweets again, she only heard her shoe heel move all of a sudden. Lin Che's feet slipped under her and she nearly fell immediately. Someone behind her cried out in alarm. Fortunately, Gu Jingze quickly held Lin Che up from beside her. The heel of Lin Che's shoe had broken. Behind, the host froze. "Oh no, your shoe is spoilt. Change into another pair." Lin Che's face turned completely red. She sensed that the camera was still filming her. In a moment of anxiousness, she lifted her head, smiled, and said, "Could it be that I've already gotten this heavy? My high heels can't even bear my weight." Everyone laughed out loud upon hearing this. Lin Che made up her mind at that moment and directly removed her shoes. She broke off the heel of the offending high-heeled shoe and smoothly removed her other shoe as well. With a forceful knock against the stairs, the heel of that shoe similarly broke off neatly. She tossed the heels aside swiftly and put on her shoes under everyone's astonished gazes. "All done." The host stared with his mouth agape. However, his response was still very quick. "Lin Che, you're too tough." Beside her, Gu Jingze also chimed in. "Yes. No one in the production team sees her as a woman." Lin Che raised her head, looked at the camera lens, and broke into a smile. The entire series of impressive actions earlier was directly stored in the camera. Below, the director smiled and nodded as he looked on. He did not forget to give a short reminder to his assistant. "Leave this part in. This scene looks good and it has effect too. We can use it as the preview." The people below the stage could not help but look at Lin Che as well. Contrary to expectation, this last was fairly decisive. Lin Li snorted at the back. She felt much more refreshed as she watched Lin Che embarrassing herself in the front. It was just that she did not expect Lin Che to actually stay calm in the crisis and directly smooth over the embarrassment. It was really a pity that she did not take a bad fall. Lin Che returned to the filming. She looked back and coincidentally saw Lin Li's proud gaze. She immediately started thinking. Until the end of the program, everything proceeded smoothly. Gu Jingze got off the stage and looked at Lin Che. "Is your leg all right?" Lin Che raised her head and smiled. "I'm fine, thank you for today." She was really grateful to Gu Jingze for helping her out so much all the time. Gu Jingze said, "What's the point of only saying it? Next time, treat me to a meal." Lin Che agreed easily. "All right, definitely." Thereafter, she saw Lin Li walk past her from the side with her head held high. The smile on Lin Che's face froze as she watched Lin Li pass by. By this time, Yu Minmin had already returned. What exactly happened just now? Yu Minmin had also been shocked upon seeing such a scary scene from below. Lin Che picked up her high heels. "I don't know what happened. These shoes are probably very expensive." Yu Minmin held up the shoes to examine them for a bit. She said, "This was obviously ruined by someone. There are cut marks over here." Lin Che narrowed her eyes, snorted, and said, "I know who did this. Lin Li. Who else could it be but her?" Chapter 73. My clothes have all been ripped. Yu Minmin walked out together with Lin Che. As they were walking, Yu Minmin said, "Luckily, your performance this time was not bad. You shouldn't have any problems." Lin Che said, "This Lin Li really seizes every chance to do evil." Yu Minmin smiled as she looked at her. "Aren't you sisters?" Lin Che said, "That's enough. The Lin family doesn't even remember that they still have me as a daughter. You've been with me for such a long time, so you should know this too." Yu Minmin smiled and looked at Lin Che. "I really don't quite understand the ways of you rich people. Our family members are just civilians. It's good enough if I send money into my mother's account every month for daily necessities and provide for my brother's education." Lin Che said, "What civilians? I'm a civilian too." Yu Minmin said, "All right. Both of us are part of a generation that doesn't have any backing and must depend on our own hard work. Still, you should be in a much better situation now. Look, Gu Jingze treats you very well and your career is on the rise." Lin Che, "Oh, please. Still, it's only my career that's reliable. As for men, why, I think Gu Jingze is very reliable too." Lin Che said, he just has a greater sense of responsibility towards me right now. Responsibility? Yu Minmin asked in a perplexed tone. Lin Che said, anyway, it's a very complicated matter. Forget it. I'll take it one step at a time. In any case, I have to work hard at my career. Yu Minmin said, that's right. It's still your career that's the most reliable. You can only hold money in your hand. Yu Minmin smiled and looked at her extremely silly manner. Lin Che did not expect that the next day, a video of her on the show would immediately be posted on the internet by a netizen at the scene. In the video, she knocked the heel of her shoe off cleanly before properly putting on the ruined shoes again and continuing the program as if nothing had happened. Everyone felt that in doing this, Lin Che was very professional. Furthermore, her actions were extremely charming. It made one involuntarily think about how tough this girl was. She was beautiful but did not have an ounce of pretentiousness or affectation, and was very easygoing. The fan count on Lin Che's Weibo page continued to surge. There were already thousands of comments on her latest Weibo post. At home, Lin Che surfed her Weibo for the most part of the day. She kept looking at those comments and felt her ego swell to a large extent. News of that day was published very soon. The headline was that Lin Che and Gu Jingze had participated in the program together and had continuous sparks of chemistry throughout the filming. Gu Jingze dashingly protected Lin Che and Lin Che worried about being attacked by his fans. Compared to all the female actresses who went on that day, Lin Che was really the one with the most exposure and the largest piece of news among them. The company was very satisfied and said that the director had personally praised Lin Che and said that she had a lot of potential in the future. Gu Jingze looked at Lin Che resting on the couch with a silly smile. He walked over and said, "What happened?" Lin Che said proudly, "I suddenly feel that I have the potential to become famous. Look, the number of fans I have now has already hit a few million." Really? Gu Jingze swept his eyes over it and smiled. He felt that she was really easily satisfied. Jingyu's fan count has probably hit tens of millions. Lin Che raised her head. Gu Jingze is a super A-list celebrity, alright. I'm just a rookie. Lin Che returned to the room and prepared to sleep. But then, she realized that the wardrobe in the room seemed to have just been organized. She opened the wardrobe, took out her pajamas, and went to the bathroom for a shower. It was only after she showered did she realize that this piece of clothing was a little strange. She only noticed when she looked in the mirror that the pajama was nearly half translucent. Lin Che yelled glumly towards the outside, "Gu Jingze, who bought these pajamas? Why are they so weird?" Gu Jingze said, "How is it weird?" Lin Che said, "Anyway, it's just very weird." Gu Jingze frowned. He opened the wardrobe and took a look before shouting back, "I think they're new clothes sent over by mother from home." Lin Che said gloomily, "Your mother's taste is too wicked. Why did she send over such sensual clothes? Perhaps she really wants to have grandchildren sooner," he smiled and said. Lin Che looked dejectedly at herself in the mirror. "Help me get another pair of pajamas." Gu Jingze looked at the various pajamas. Every piece really had its highlight. It made him a little curious involuntarily. He did not know how exactly these pajamas, which were full of temptation, would look on Lin Che's body. After looking all of them over, he still did not find a normal pair of pajamas. It looked like his mother had made up her mind this time to properly bring the two of them together. This was the reason why she had sent over such piles of clothing. Gu Jingze said, "There's no wearable clothing." "Then what should I do?" Lin Che thought for a bit before saying, "Lend me your clothes first so I can wear them." "Mine," Gu Jingze said, "just put up with it and wear it. What part of your body have I not seen before?" "I don't want to. Don't worry. After I wear it I won't return it to you. You have so many clothes that you haven't worn before. It's no trouble for you to lend me a piece anyway." After a short while, Gu Jingze knocked on the door from outside. Lin Che carefully opened a sliver of the door. Inside, the mist from her earlier shower traveled outwards languidly and was accompanied by the fragrance of her body wash. Gu Jingze looked at her face, which was covered in 2 red patches after her shower. Her face triggered his sense of protectiveness like a baby's face would, and he could not help but feel his body jolt. Lin Che did not notice his strange behavior. She tugged the clothes and closed the door in a hurry. In no time, she changed her clothes and walked out. Lin Che was smugly dressed in his roomy clothes and said cheerfully, "I'm still the smart one." Upon hearing the sound, Gu Jingze turned his head. Immediately he saw a white mass drift by. Lin Che was wearing his pajamas. It was huge and bloated as well, making her body appear even more delicate and small. The sleeves were too long, so they were rolled up. The white expanse of her arms swayed back and forth like the roots of a lotus. The collar was too wide, so the dazzling white of her collarbones underneath and her uncovered chest could vaguely be seen. Instantly, Gu Jingze turned his head away. His Adam's apple was faintly moving back and forth. Naturally, a woman wearing a man's pajama made one feel that the relationship was very ambiguous. It very easily made one think many strange thoughts. Gu Jingze turned his head. "Lin Che, change back into your own clothes." Lin Che turned her head in astonishment. "Why? I'll get someone to buy you clothes." He stood up as he said this. He did not look at her enrapturing body as he opened the door. Lin Che curled her lip. "But I won't ruin it by wearing it." All right, since you don't like it, I'll just return the clothes to you." Lin Che said, "But if you get someone to change the clothes, wouldn't mother find it weird and suspect our marital relationship?" After all, if they were husband and wife, wearing clothes that were translucent should not be a big deal either. Gu Jingze glanced at Lin Che and walked over. He said lowly, "I have a way to dispel their suspicions." Lin Che looked at him in confusion. The corner of Gu Jingze's lips lifted at once. He directly picked up that translucent piece of clothing belonging to Lin Che. The moment he exerted force with his two hands, the thin fabric easily ripped apart. Lin Che's face turned completely green. Gu Jingze opened the door and said, "What clothing is this?" With one tear, "It's ruined. Help change madam's clothes to sturdier ones." He placed the completely torn pair of pajamas aside. A few maids could not help but stare speechlessly at one another as they looked at it. Was the clothing unable to bear the excessive excitement? Behind them, Lin Che's face was completely red. "This damn Gu Jingze." The maids quickly retrieved a normal pair of pajamas. They swept their eyes over them with completely teasing gazes. It was as if they were saying, "You two were really a little too passionate." Chapter 74. Don't move, keep still in your sleep. The door closed before their eyes. Lin Che glared fixedly at Gu Jingze, whose face was entirely calm. Gu Jingze raised his eyebrows. "Why?" Lin Che stomped her foot in his direction. "Humph." She then grabbed the pajamas and hurried inside. As he watched her go in, Gu Jingze smiled with his lips pressed together. However, he could not help but feel a little regretful as he gazed at those pajamas in their various colors and styles. She had a very nice figure. She would probably look very good in these clothes. Gu Jingze picked up the clothes and looked at them slightly wistfully. However, he heard the door open noisily in an instant before Lin Che came out from inside. After changing her clothes, Lin Che finally heaved a sigh of relief. The pajamas she was wearing was a long linen gown. It did not show off her figure at all and she looked like a water bucket. Lin Che thought that it was terrific. Gu Jingze threw down the pajamas and lifted his head. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the clothes on Lin Che's body. These maids, what clothes did they get for her? Lin Che returned to the bed comfortably. After sitting down with her legs crossed, she carelessly picked up a nail clipper and began trimming her toenails. Gu Jingze looked at her with his face completely dumbfounded. Lin Che's soft and white legs were crossed. In the middle of her legs, a sliver of her white underwear could distinctly be seen. From such a small sliver, he could see her triangle-shaped underwear, which was laced with a thin floral border. It had cut into her flesh slightly and left some marks. Her legs were intertwined and Gu Jingze could not help but walk a few steps closer to her. He felt gloomy as he looked at her indecent actions, but he could not help but shift his gaze towards her. How he wished she could move again. That way, more of the soft flesh underneath would definitely be exposed. After she was done with her toenails, Lin Che grabbed her feet and blew on them. When her feet were lifted up, her flesh inside was even more greatly exposed. Gu Jingze felt a surge of arousal in his lower abdomen and finally could not bear it any longer. "Lin Che, can you sit even slightly like a woman?" Lin Che lifted her head. What did I do? What did you do? Do you want to know? Gu Jingze lifted his eyebrows. Before Lin Che could even react, Gu Jingze had already walked up to her. He lowered his head and placed an arm on both sides of her. He encased her thin and small body in his embrace and seemed inches away from pushing her down. Lin Che's eyes flashed as she looked at the man who approached her all of a sudden. He was right in front of her and his gaze was deep and secretive. His gaze landed on her frontal chest. It was as if his large hand had caressed it all over. Feeling uneasy, Lin Che wanted to put some distance between them. What are you doing? Lin Che's gaze was flashing. You started seducing me first. Gu Jingze's breath was like the scent of orchids. I totally did not. Don't ever wear clothes like these when you're beside a man. With a warning gaze, he swept his eyes all over her body. His voice was low and husky like the beautiful sound of a cello. Why, quote. Because, it's too easy to remove. His eyes followed the wide hem of the gown as if he could look through this piece of clothing and into her body. Lin Che froze. In the next moment, his long arms directly held her in his embrace. Lin Che was completely shocked and she toppled onto the soft blanket on the bed. She quickly grabbed his hand and struggled. Gu Jingze, you're behaving like a hoodlum. Shish, don't move. His long arms reached over and directly wrapped around her body. His magnetic voice was like a magical sound resonating in her ears. It had a unique kind of magic. Otherwise, I'll really behave like a hoodlum. But, just when Lin Che was about to move, she really and palpably felt something of some sort behind her. It was so obviously sticking up against her body. She froze. When she widened her eyes and figured out what that thing was, her heart jolted and she did not dare to move recklessly. Gu Jingze just carried her in his arms like this. Alright, that's all, sleep. What? Gu Jingze frowned. I'm telling you to sleep. Do you not understand? But Or do you want to exercise for a bit before sleeping? He was almost biting on her ear as he muttered this. His voice implied an exercise of a different kind. Lin Che's body was awfully stiff and rigid. She only felt that all of her blood seemed to be flowing backward. Her brain also followed suit and became dizzy. No need. Sleep, she said hurriedly. She lay in his embrace for a long time. She only heaved a sigh of relief when she seemed to feel the thing sticking up behind her body finally soften slowly by a large degree. Gu Jingze felt the woman in his arms become more and more relaxed. Gradually, her shallow breaths began to even out as their sounds traveled over to him. He also slowly relaxed his body. However, some part of his body was obviously not as sensible as its counterparts. He sighed audibly. As he looked at the woman sleeping soundly in his arms, he carefully changed the position of his arms. He lowered his head and could still smell the faint scent of her hair. He shut his eyes hard. She was seriously a dumb woman. The next day, when Lin Che woke up, she realized that Gu Jingze was already gone. Lin Che ran out. From the entrance of the dining room, she saw Gu Jingze eating. Gu Jingze's complexion did not look good. He looked as if he had not slept well. Lin Che walked over to him guiltily. She recalled that she had slept in his embrace the night before. However, she had already forgotten what happened after that. She asked Gu Jingze, why? Was my sleeping posture last night not too good? To be honest, I tend to toss and turn in my sleep. No, he merely moved his arm uneasily. His arm was a little stiff from having been used by her as a pillow. This was the result of not moving it at all for a night. The maids quickly served some breakfast to Lin Che. Lin Che raised her head and thanked them politely. After eating breakfast, Lin Che wanted to go to work. Gu Jingze said, I'll take you along with me. Let's go. Lin Che stood up hurriedly. Really, I'll go change my clothes. As he looked at Lin Che run inside, Gu Jingze shook his head wordlessly. She was always behaving in a crazy manner. The maid smiled and tidied up the dishes. She said, Sir, do we really have to change all of the clothes that ma'am sent over for madam? Gu Jingze recalled those strangely shaped pajamas. Throw them all away. All right, but it's a bit of a pity. They're all in madam's size. The maid said, the rest of the pajamas have already been put up. Gu Jingze nodded. The maid heard the noises that Lin Che was making inside. They figured that she was looking for clothes again. Gu Jingze said gloomily, "She's seriously clumsy." The maid smiled and said, "People are bound to have some shortcomings. Madam is such a good person. Thus, it doesn't really matter that she's clumsy." "She's a good person?" Gu Jingze raised his eyebrows. The maid said, "Yes. Madam does not put on airs at all. She treats us servants like her own family members. No matter what we do, Madam always says good, good, good. Often, she even gives us clothes that she hasn't worn. When she comes back with supper, she never forgets to bring some for us. Madam is truly an excellent person." In no time, Lin Che walked out. Gu Jingze looked silently at her figure. He narrowed his eyes and looked at her deeper and deeper. Lin Che walked out and said in a surprised tone, "What happened?" Gu Jingze stood up, casually picked up his clothes, and put them on. "Nothing. Let's go." Lin Che still had to participate in promotional activities today, so she was dressed in plain clothes. In any case, once she arrived at the company, she would then have to dress more meticulously and do her makeup too. Chapter 75, I'll go shopping together with you. The television series finally premiered amidst a lot of fanfare. During this time, advertisements for Swords of Love could be seen along every street and alley. Sometimes, Lin Che could see them even when she went shopping. But right now, she was just beginning to get some exposure. After all, she was not known to everyone like Gu Jingze was. Thus, the people outside still did not recognize her. As a result, even if she went out shopping, no one noticed her as well. She was still just like an ordinary person. But it was clear that the television series was already receiving attention from the broadcast of its first episode. Its viewership ratings stood firmly in first place and its related news fully occupied the list of hot topics. And the few main leads inside began to be roped into various methods to generate hype. Naturally, the response from Gu Jingze's fans was huge. Every day, his fans followed him around noisily as he attended his promotional activities and made everyone envious. Mu Feiren liked to keep a low profile. She did not really like to attend promotional activities and only went to several important places. One could tell that she had the style of a greatly successful person. And a small actress like Lin Che could only move to wherever she was needed. She followed suit and attended the promotional activities to the point where her legs nearly broke. However, she also reaped many benefits. Gradually, she started being able to respond to the reporters' questions. She began to learn from Gu Jingze and was able to beat about the bush. Gu Jingze took very good care of her the entire time and as a result, her reputation began to rise as well. Furthermore, what was even more delightful was that Lin Che's tough girl role in the television series was extremely well received. In no time, there were already people claiming to be Lin Che's fans and even a fan club was established. Lin Che knew that this was just a temporary effect. Whether or not this phenomenon could continue still depended on how her future developed. However, even if this was the case, she was already very satisfied. On the day that they went to the Gu residence to have a meal, the television series was coincidentally broadcasted on the television. Gu Jingze immediately saw Lin Che in the television series. She was holding a whip in her hand and appeared unrestrained and handsome. She looked extremely dashing. Contrary to what Gu Jingze had expected, Lin Che had such a side to her. He could not help but take another look at the television series, even though he never watched any. Lin Che was usually such a dazed person. He could not tell that she, in fact, had quite the flair for acting. After the two of them ate at the Gu residence, they prepared to return to their own home. While they were waiting at the entrance for the driver to pick them up, Lin Che suddenly said, "Actually, this place is pretty close to the house. Why do we have to insist on waiting for the driver to come? Let's just walk back. We ate so much for dinner, it'll be nice for our digestion." Behind them, just when Qin Hao wanted to come up to them and say something to stop them, he saw Gu Jingze stretching out a hand calmly. He gestured at Qin Hao to swallow what he was about to say. Gu Jingze looked at the sky and secretly gave a cue to the bodyguards behind him with his eyes. Thereafter, he nodded at Lin Che. "All right, we'll do as you said." When they arrived outside, the bodyguards spread themselves out slightly. Gu Jingze turned his head and took a glance. Only after ascertaining that everything was fine did he relax and walk outward along the street with Lin Che. This was a well-known area for the wealthy in B City. The back of the area was filled with villas attached with gardens in various manner. Not many people lived there. However, Lin Che felt that there were even fewer people than usual today. She did not notice that there were many bodyguards following behind her. She walked on the path feeling at ease in her heart. The street lights beside the road shone down on a narrow stone-tiled path. It appeared very peaceful and secluded. Looking into the distance, there was a great feel to it. With one look, Lin Che saw someone selling handmade soaps at the side. She was attracted by those little trinkets and immediately shouted before hurriedly walking over. Gu Jingze, look. This small rabbit was made so realistically. I want to buy it. When the shop owner saw the people following behind them, he just felt that their aura was extraordinary. They just did not look like ordinary people. Upon seeing the bodyguards dressed in black who were silently following behind them, a chill ran down his back. Thus, he was very fearful and respectful to the few important people who had suddenly come to his small shop. He said cautiously to Lin Che, these are all handmade. They can simply be made on the spot and absolutely have the most natural fragrances. Upon hearing this, Gu Jingze said to Lin Che, if you like it, you can try making one yourself. Lin Che said, really? Can I make one on my own? The shop owner quickly said, of course you can. Here, we provide molds for customers to try on their own. Immediately, Lin Che got very happy and smiled until she was grinning from ear to ear. As Gu Jingze saw this, the corners of his lips also began to lift up slightly. Lin Che was really a person who was very easy to satisfy. Such a small trinket could even make her smile so happily. The two of them entered the shop. The bodyguards outside naturally gathered together and quietly waited outside. As Lin Che looked at Gu Jingze, she broke into a mischievous smile. Excuse me, I want to make a handmade soap that is in his shape. Do you think that's possible? The shop owner said, it's not impossible either. Gu Jingze presently stood beside her. Upon hearing this, he looked down and smiled. Don't you think that's a little inappropriate? How was it inappropriate? Lin Che said. Gu Jingze snickered. A corner of his lips lifted gently. Handmade soaps are used when you're showering. So you mean that you hope to use a soap made in my liking to rub all over your body when you're showering? Lin Che's face turned completely red. I don't mean that at all. Gu Jingze lowered his head again slightly. As he looked at her small neck, he quietly sucked in a breath. He intentionally pressed himself close to her hair and gently said, it's all right. I look forward to it greatly. Go ahead. No, I don't want to do it anymore. I want to make a small rabbit too, humph. The shop owner finally heaved a sigh of relief upon hearing this. From the side, he helped Lin Che as she made the soap. However, Lin Che's ability was obviously not strong. The soap she made looked very strange. Gu Jingze said, look at how clumsy you are. He could not tolerate that dumb manner of hers, so he also personally began to help her make it. How should I do this? Stupid. Move your hand over a bit. Does this look like a rabbit? Lin Che, how can you be this stupid? Lin Che looked at him speechlessly. Anyone would get anxious with you rushing them like this. The two of them bickered noisily. At any rate, they ultimately managed to make a bar of handmade soap. The shop owner smiled and said, I can engrave your name on the soap to commemorate this. Gu Jingze nodded and said, in that case, just engrave it. Lin Che's heart jolted immediately. As she looked at her own name and Gu Jingze's name carved together at the side, the smile on her face deepened slightly. After a lot of difficulties, the two of them had finally finished making it. The shop owner packaged the soap into a beautiful bag for them. Gu Jingze casually picked up the bag and continued walking out with Lin Che. Lin Che said with a huge sense of accomplishment, I'm really talented. I made it look so beautiful. It was clearly made entirely by me. Nonsense. I laid down the foundations. You only made it by standing on the shoulders of a giant. Alright, as long as you're happy. Hey, there's ice cream. I want to eat that. Gu Jingze glanced over at it. It was ice cream that was made on the spot. Only little children were eating the ice cream. It's unhygienic, don't eat it. No, no, even if it's dirty, I won't get ill from eating it. Hubby, buy one for me. Upon hearing her call him hubby, Gu Jingze felt his body begin to get tingly. Frustrated, he glared at Lin Che and said reluctantly, let's go. Oh yeah. The two of them reached the bottom of the stairs very soon. However, just when they had taken the last step down, they suddenly heard a familiar voice from behind. Jingze, why are you here? To think that they would meet Mo Hilling here. Chapter 76. Mo Hilling was purposely clinging to him. Mo Hilling looked at them. One was tall and lanky and the other was slender. The two of them actually looked very intimate as they stood closely beside one another. And Gu Jingze was even carrying a small gift bag in his hand. The shop's name was drawn on the gift bag. It was called Carving Time. Mo Hilling walked over in a few hurried steps. She pulled Gu Jingze's arm all of a sudden and quietly inserted herself between the two of them. Jingze. She lifted her head and smiled at Gu Jingze. Then, she stretched out her hand as she wanted to take the item in his hand. What are you holding? Let me take a look. Gu Jingze subconsciously evaded her. It's nothing. Upon being evaded, Mo Hilling's face froze. She looked at Gu Jingze and pursed her lips. Didn't you bring someone along? Why do you still need to carry this? I'll help you carry it. Gu Jingze could not help but glance at Lin Che at the side. She stood there looking at the two of them. Her face seemed to be fairly calm. Gu Jingze said, no need, it's nothing heavy. It was difficult for Mo Hilling to say anything again. She could only tilt her head and secretly glare at Lin Che. Lin Che did not know what she had done wrong to make Mo Hilling detest her so much in such a short time. But thinking about it, it would have been even more strange for Mo Hilling to like her. Mo Hilling looked at the two of them. Why are the two of you here? Gu Jingze said, oh, we just came from eating dinner at the Gu residence. Once again, Mo Hilling reproachfully turned her head and secretly glanced at Lin Che. Why did you walk back? Gu Jingze said, we just walked back since we had nothing else to do. Why are you here? Mo Hilling raised her head. She looked at Gu Jingze with a face full of cuteness. She completely did not care that Lin Che was still beside her watching. I just wanted to buy something to eat. I didn't expect to see you too. Jingze, there just happens to be a cafe over there. The ambiance is really there actually. Accompany me there so that we can sit inside, alright? Her eyes paused. She turned her head back and said to Lin Che, it's rare for us to bump into each other here. Let's go over together and sit inside for a bit. Lin Che looked at Gu Jingze. She did not really want to intrude upon their quality time together. However, just when she was about to say, no, I'll go home first, she felt Mo Hilling suddenly hook her arm through hers as if pretending to be close to her. Let's go. We'll go there together and sit for a while. Lin Che was simply pulled along. She turned her head back speechlessly and looked at Gu Jingze. However, Gu Jingze's expression was aloof as usual. She could not tell what exactly he was thinking. Lin Che could only follow them into the cafe. After sitting down, Mo Hilling automatically sat beside Gu Jingze. She looked at Lin Che across from her, smiled, and said, what does Miss Lin want to drink? Lin Che said, I'm fine with anything. To be honest, she did not really like drinking coffee. She could not tell the difference between the flavors of the different types of coffee. Mo Hilling took charge and called a waiter over. She said directly, 3 Jamaican Blue Mountain coffees. Mo Hilling smiled and said, Jingze only likes drinking Blue Mountain coffee. The Blue Mountain coffee from this shop is pretty authentic. Right, Jingze? Gu Jingze could tell that Mo Hilling was intentionally leaning close to him. He could not help but be slightly unhappy. Gu Jingze said, anything is fine. Mo Hilling lifted her head to look at Gu Jingze with a face full of tenderness. Jingze, you've even lost weight. Have you been getting tired recently? You have to care more about getting rest. Don't be so concerned about your job. Your health is the most important. Gu Jingze felt Mo Hilling's hand rest on his arm. He instinctively felt slightly uncomfortable and evaded her touch by moving backward. He smoothly pushed away her hand. Mo Hilling sensed that he was actually evading her. She became even angrier and moved forward so that she would be nearly leaning against his body. Gu Jingze's brow began to furrow deeply. Even though he understood that Mo Hilling had a childish temper and was intentionally putting on a show for Lin Che because she was jealous, he still felt unhappy. She had gone slightly overboard by doing this. Again, Mo Hilling seemed to suddenly remember that there was someone else besides them. She let out a dry cough and smiled at Lin Che in embarrassment. Lin Che pulled up the corners of her mouth and looked at her nonchalantly. Although she felt uncomfortable in her heart, she still looked calm on the surface as if she was unconcerned. Otherwise, what else could she do? Mo Hilling and Gu Jingze were originally a couple anyway. Lin Che did not even need Mo Hilling's intentional reminders right now to know this. Mo Hilling smiled at Lin Che and asked her as if she was very concerned, "Recently, I seem to have seen a lot of news about you. I still have to congratulate you. That television series seems to be doing very well." Lin Che smiled as well. "Thank you." Mo Hilling said, "It's true that I don't understand the workings of artists like you. But I think that this is probably considered successful as an artist." As she said this, she pressed her lips to the cup and drank a mouthful of coffee. She looked as if she considered herself superior and her eyes had a hint of unconcealed condescension. Lin Che could not be bothered to put on a pretense in front of her. She raised her head haughtily and smiled. "It's only just the beginning. I'm still very far away from achieving success. But ultimately, I'm still young, so I have a long road ahead of me." Mo Hilling had grown up together with Gu Jingze since they were young. Her age was also very similar to Gu Jingze's. Naturally, she was also much older than Lin Che. No matter how well she took care of herself, the difference in age between her and Lin Che could still be seen. When Mo Hilling heard Lin Che say this, her expression changed immediately. But because Gu Jingze was still beside her, it was difficult for her to say anything. She could only suppress her anger. She smiled at Lin Che and said, "Is that so? Then I'll congratulate you on your success in advance. But I didn't expect you to even know Jingyu. It looks like your relationship with him is really not bad." Lin Che said neutrally, "Yes, we're friends too. Jingyu is really a good person." Mo Hilling intentionally said, "He's very nice to people and really knows how to look after them. You two even looked like quite a good match on television." At this moment, Gu Jingze stood up immediately and said unhappily, "That's enough, Hilling. It's time for us to go home too." Mo Hilling's mood dampened instantly. She stood up with a swishing sound as well and looked at Gu Jingze angrily. "What's wrong, Jingze?" Right at that moment, Gu Jingze's phone started ringing. Gu Jingze glanced meaningfully at Mo Hilling. He saw that the number was Gu Jingming's. Afraid that something had cropped up, he went out first to answer the call. After Mo Hilling saw Gu Jingze leave, she turned back and looked at Lin Che. She said, "Lin Che, what exactly are you doing?" Lin Che sneered. She looked at Mo Hilling's features change immediately after Gu Jingze left. Her acting skills were really good. Lin Che said, "What did I do?" Mo Hilling snorted and said, "You made Gu Jingze carry things for you and even made him accompany you to walk on the streets at night. Do you know how dangerous it is for Jingze to do such a thing?" "Dangerous? Of course. Do you think that Jingze is like you, a small artiste who has nothing at all? His life is worth more than 100 of yours. If something happens to him, do you know what the consequences will be? I just knew it. Living together with a commoner like you will sooner or later be disastrous for him. Lin Che, if you want to die, it's up to you, but don't pull Jingze along with you." Lin Che sneered as she looked at Mo Hilling. "Miss Mo, in your eyes, is Gu Jingze just some vulnerable item that faces perpetual danger and can't go anywhere at all?" Chapter 77. You definitely misunderstood her. What? Mo Hilling did not expect Lin Che to even dare to retort. Lin Che said, "That's right. I did come out to walk the streets with him and to walk home together. That's because in my eyes, he's not a man who's in danger. He's a man who has the right to enjoy life and has the right to be an ordinary person. He's my husband and the two of us share the same bed. Given our status and relationship, there's no issue as to whether we can or cannot do something. He helped me carry things and accompanied me on a stroll because we're a married couple." "You? Indeed, I don't understand the danger that you're talking about. Because in my eyes, he was never an important person. He's my husband. Mo Hilling's face turned purple with rage at Lin Che's words. Lin Che merely snickered. So no matter how low I am in your eyes, I'm Gu Jingze's wife. Great Miss Mo, I don't need you to criticize my life with Gu Jingze. When she was finished, Lin Che turned around immediately and left. Lin Che only let out a breath when she came outside. She stood by the entrance and looked at the sky that was dyed thoroughly neon. She was also very worried about becoming a burden to Gu Jingze. Because the gap in their lifestyles was so large, there were many things that she did not understand and many things that she was confused about. She closed her eyes and sighed before striding forward. However, when Gu Jingze returned from outside, he realized that only Mo Hilling was left in the cafe. Upon seeing Gu Jingze return, Mo Hilling cried and sprawled onto the table. Gu Jingze froze before walking over to ask, "What happened, Hilling?" Mo Hilling raised her head, her eyes glistening with tears. "Jingze, I really don't want you to live together with Lin Che anymore." Gu Jingze frowned as he looked at her. "What happened?" Mo Hilling looked at him miserably and pitifully. "Do you know what Lin Che did to me just now?" Gu Jingze's brow twitched. "What did she do?" "She told me that it was you and her who are husband and wife. Whatever she does is always right and whatever I do is always wrong. She and you have an equal relationship." Then what am I? Jingze, am I the third party? But clearly, you and I are a pair. Why did she say this to me? Why did she hurt me like this?" Gu Jingze lowered his eyes to look at her. "Did she really say that?" "Yes," Mo Hilling said. "If you don't believe it, you can go and ask her if she said that the two of you are the married couple. When you were here, she did not even say a word. The moment you left, she immediately started saying things like this to me. What exactly does she mean?" "That's enough, Hilling. I think you misunderstood what she said," Gu Jingze said. "That's impossible," Mo Hilling said. "I'm not a fool either. I heard what she said clearly word for word. Why, Jingze, could it be that you don't believe me?" Gu Jingze sighed. He sat down and looked at her. "No, I just feel that she's not that kind of person. You probably misunderstood her. That's why you misconstrued her words. Alright, Hilling, don't cry anymore." However, Mo Hilling bit her lips and felt even more upset. Gu Jingze said, "Let's go. I'll get someone to take you home." "You're not coming with me," Mo Hilling said dolefully as she lifted her small face. Gu Jingze did not see Lin Che. He was anxious to find out where Lin Che had gone and what exactly had happened. He was vaguely worried that she was angry, so after pondering for a bit, he still said to Mo Hilling, "I'll look for you tomorrow again. Right now, I still have an urgent matter to attend to." Mo Hilling recalled that he had gone out in a hurry earlier to answer a call. She thought that he probably did have an urgent matter. She thought to herself that she was definitely not like Lin Che, who was not considerate of his busy schedule. She merely hooked her arm through his. She was careful not to touch his body so as to prevent him from breaking out in a rash. However, she also longed to feel his body heat. She looked at his perfectly handsome looks and said softly to him, "In that case, go ahead and attend to your matters. Don't tire yourself out too much. I won't be able to bear it. I know that you're busy, so I won't disturb you." Gu Jingze drew in a deep breath and said to her, "Go home. Remember to look for me tomorrow once you're free. I'll be waiting for you." "Alright," Gu Jingze agreed earnestly. After Mo Hilling left, Gu Jingze asked where the madam had gone. In no time, his subordinates brought him along and together, they found Lin Che, who was strolling alone by the side of the road in the direction of their home. Gu Jingze caught up with Lin Che and said, "Why did you leave on your own?" Lin Che thought that he would have to console Mo Hilling for quite a while. Seeing that he had come over so soon, she said perplexedly, "Why didn't you properly accompany Miss Mo and chat with her?" Seeing that Mo Hilling had gotten so angry, Lin Che also knew that Mo Hilling would definitely not have anything good to say about her after she left. Gu Jingze raised his eyebrows and looked at her. "Why, did you want us to chat for longer?" Lin Che said, "Yes. It was rare for you to have bumped into each other. You're really so thoughtful." Should he praise her for being such a magnanimous and good wife? Lin Che looked at him. "Of course, that's the case. My personality is just I forgot how the idiom goes. It's used to describe someone who's generous. More tolerance will make you a bigger person. Yes, it describes me exactly. Gu Jingze lowered his head and swept his eyes over her chest. HN, your breasts are big. Lin Che looked down and covered herself. Get lost, you hoodlum. Gu Jingze broke into a smile. He only relaxed when he saw that she was not unhappy. However, he recalled what Mo Hilling had said and tilted his head to ask her, you told Mo Hilling just now that we're a married couple, so whatever we do is always right. She just knew that Mo Hilling would not say anything good about her. She did not seem to have phrased it in that way, but there was no problem with construing it like this either. Yes, is that not the case? Lin Che intentionally acted stupid and tilted her head to look at him. Gu Jingze looked at Lin Che, blinking her eyes innocently with her face tilted. She looked extremely adorable and Gu Jingze helplessly shook his head. Yes. Your words were right. Lin Che said, of course. You're my husband and I'm your wife. Didn't you often say that we're a married couple and that it's only right for you to look after me? Thus, accompanying me on a stroll and helping me hold things are acts that a husband should do. Isn't that right, hubby? She was really becoming more and more daring toward him. She pulled on his arm when she came up to him and swung it back and forth. Tell me, hubby, am I not right? He really felt that his heart was about to melt. He could not help but smile and look at her. Okay, you're right. Only then did Lin Che smile. She saw that they had almost reached the Gu villa. The two of them then went in together. When they went into the house, Lin Che eagerly took out the pile of handmade soaps that the two of them had made. Although they looked slightly strange as they lay there, the color of the handmade soaps was still pretty nice. She actually really felt a little unwilling to use them. Gu Jingze looked on from behind her. He pointed at those in the pile that Lin Che had made. These are really awfully ugly. That's impossible. This is called art. Do you understand it or not? It's just like Picasso's art. This is called abstract art. Gu Jingze shook his head and said, you're so bad with your hands and feet. Worse still, you only know how to look for excuses. Lin Che turned her head back to glare at him. A maid watched them from the side. Seeing that the two of them looked very happy, she could not help but interrupt and say, Madam, sir, did you make these? They look really good. Lin Che immediately turned her head and said, yes, I made all the nice-looking ones. The ugly ones were made by Gu Jingze. She picked up the soaps that they had made and looked at them. What am I going to do? I can't bear to use any of them. Gu Jingze leaned in close and said, there's no reason for you to be unwilling to use them. We can just make them again in the future. He also picked up a handful to play with. He smiled and looked at her name on the soaps and said to her, you use the ones that I made and I'll use the ones that you made. Upon hearing this, Lin Che's face instinctively turned completely red. Gu Jingze proceeded to lower his head and say, when you use it, won't you feel like I'm touching you all over your body? Quote. Chapter 78. I'll do whatever I want to do. Lin Che was sitting at the side. She could feel Gu Jingze's body heat get stronger. He was standing right behind her, his body pressed against her back. He could even smell the scent of shampoo from her head. Although she clearly used the same shampoo and body wash as he did, he felt that the scent on her body was different. The scent seemed to be mixed with the fragrance of a woman. He felt as if the scent was surrounding his nose and penetrating deep into his heart. He instinctively moved slightly closer again. He lowered his head and the tip of his nose nearly touched her hair. Lin Che sat rigidly upright. As she felt his breaths, she did not dare to move another inch. The maids in the Gu family were all very sensible. Seeing that the two of them were here, the maids silently retreated in no time. Only the two of them were left in the room. From above, Gu Jingze looked at the white and clear expanse of her neck. He felt the urge to somewhat touch it. Lin Che could sense a hot hand slowly moving closer to her. Thus, she turned her head abruptly and looked at Gu Jingze behind her. She glared at him and asked, Hey, Gu Jingze, what are you doing? Upon being caught red-handed while trying to touch her secretly, Gu Jingze momentarily felt ashamed. But when he saw Lin Che's questioning gaze, he raised his eyebrows and asked calmly, what am I doing? Lin Che swept her eyes over his hand. Stop groping me behind my back. Lin Che, we're a married couple. How can you call this groping? Of course this is groping, you hoodlum. Gu Jing's face was pulled tight. In an instant, he was sitting before Lin Che so closely that she got immediately surprised. She only felt Gu Jing's directly nestle up to her and suddenly kiss her once on her lips. It was like a dragonfly skimming across the water, but it still made her feel burning hot. Lin Che's face instantly turned into the color of a red apple. Gu Jing's felt that he really very much liked how Lin Che was so sensitive. Her face looked as if it would break upon being provoked. Her skin was so thin and turned red so easily. Immediately, Lin Che leaned backward and moved slightly further from his face. Gu Jing said, "You're my wife. I'll kiss you if I want to, you got that?" "Get lost, hoodlum," Lin Che covered her mouth and yelled. Wickedness flashed on Gu Jingze's face. His gaze followed her beautiful neck and moved downwards. "If I'm a hoodlum, I won't just stop here. You really want me to behave like one?" "You," quote. Gu Jing's broke into a smile and directly kissed her lips. Lin Che let out a low breath. She only felt the tip of his tongue high-handedly rob her of all her air. Although it was not good for Gu Jing's to be in close contact with women due to his illness, he instinctively ran his hand along her frontal chest and grabbed at it. He groped at it and gently kneaded it. His breathing gradually began to quicken. Her body was really too soft. It seemed to make him hate that he could not knead it into a pulp. Lin Che felt him exert more force. The dull feeling of pain was accompanied by a strong electric current. It made her body begin tingling as well. She instinctively whined. Her body turned limp from time to time. Her body was nearly resting in his embrace. Her hands involuntarily came up to rest on his shoulders. However, she felt his hands move to her back and touch her all over. Gu Jing's felt his body burning ridiculously hot. The lust that was nearly about to burst out of his body was extremely hard for him to bear. He really wanted to just forget everything else and devour her now. However, right at this moment, he heard someone knocking on the door outside. With his face flushed red, Gu Jing's released the woman in his embrace after a lot of difficulty. He asked angrily in the direction of the door, "What happened?" "Sir, first young master is here." Gu Jingming was here. Gu Jing's could only let go of her for the moment. As he looked at Lin Che's completely red face, he could not help but give it one last gentle peck again before he stood up directly. He did not take another look at her so as not to momentarily lose control and just take her. Lin Che was still in a daze. She sensed that Gu Jing's had pulled open the door and left. Her face was colored brilliantly red and full of bashfulness. She pinched herself once ruthlessly. Was she dreaming? This Gu Jing's. What exactly was he doing? Gu Jing's came down the stairs step by step. Sure enough, he saw Gu Jingming down below. Outside, the bodyguards from the National Security Agency were awaiting orders. It looked like they were here on an official business. Big brother, this had better be something important. Gu Jingming looked at Gu Jing's as he walked down. Why, did I interrupt something good? Gu Jing's eyebrows shot up. Naturally, I'm not a bachelor like Big Brother. I'm someone who got married. Of course, I don't let just anyone into my house. Next time, can you at least give me a heads up in advance? Gu Jingming smiled and shook his head as he looked at Gu Jing's. Alright, I understand. For a moment, I forgot that you're already married. But since you seem to be enjoying your married life right now, next time, I'll try to get used to it too. Gu Jing sat down together with Gu Jingming. Only then did Gu Jingming place the tablet computer in his hands in front of Gu Jing's. Someone sent this to me. Gu Jing's lowered his head and looked at it. It was Gu Jingming on the bed with a woman. It looked like it had probably been taken in secret. However, although the two of them could not be considered completely naked, their clothes were disheveled. Still, what they had just experienced was apparent. Gu Jing's immediately lifted his eyes up. What happened here? Gu Jingming sighed. I suspect that he may have even worse clandestine photos because on that day. Gu Jingming looked down and massaged his brow. Immediately Gu Jing's understood. Even more explosive scenes had occurred on that day. Is there a mole among the bodyguards in the National Security Agency? If not, how could anyone have taken such a picture? Investigations are already ongoing. Right now, the primary concern is to figure out how to improve this situation. Who is this woman? Gu Jingze asked amusedly. I didn't expect Big Brother to even have a private life. Gu Jingming raised his head and looked at him coolly. It's Yu Minmin. Quote. Gu Jingze's gaze sank downwards. After the two of them had discussed official matters, Gu Jingze walked him out. I'll get people to investigate this matter. Gu Jingming could not mobilize his own forces to investigate this matter while avoiding being discovered. It would only exacerbate their situation. Thus, he needed Gu Jingze to make a move. Gu Jingming nodded. Gu Jingze said, if that's not possible, why won't Big Brother just marry her? No one can say anything about what Mr. President is with his own wife. Gu Jingming looked at him. No way. Gu Jingze smiled and said, why? Problems with her profession. A manager will have blots on her reputation. Or is it her family affairs that are complicated? Gu Jingming said, I investigated her before. Her family is fairly ordinary, but her family affairs are very complicated. She has a younger brother who relies completely on her earnings to pay his school fees. That's not a problem at all. The crux is that she has a father who likes to gamble. Gu Jingze was dumbfounded as he looked at Gu Jingming. Looks like we still have to give this matter more thoughts. But it's apparent that she's definitely a civilian. The suggestion I made the last time will actually still be effective. It just depends on whether you accept it or not. What? Getting married to a civilian. It's highly advantageous for your number of votes in the election this time. Gu Jingming glanced at him meaningfully. Without responding, he walked outside. Chapter 79. It's nothing, go to sleep. Gu Jingze walked inside while mumbling, Yu Minmin. In no time, he returned to Lin Che's room. She did not even dare to look at Gu Jingze and kept evading his gaze. Gu Jingze looked at Lin Che and asked, on that day, why did you and your manager go to the hotel that Big Brother was staying at? Lin Che raised her head and paused before saying, oh, you're talking about that day. It was Gu Jingyu's treat that day. Everyone went to celebrate together after the closing party. I brought Sister Yu along with me. Gu Jingyu brought us there because that hotel is run by the Gu family. Who knew that Mr. President went there too? Gu Jingze sat down in deep thought. Everything looked like it happened naturally. It was probably not some conspiracy. The reason Yu Minmin appeared there was even because of the third youngest brother of their own family. Furthermore, since Yu Minmin's background had already been thoroughly investigated, it was probably proof that there was no big problem. It could not be an act of espionage. But was Yu Minmin really not involved? Lin Che looked at Gu Jingze perplexedly. Why did you start asking about this all of a sudden? Gu Jingze raised his head and smiled. It's nothing, go to sleep. Okay. Because he did not talk about it, Lin Che did not shoot her mouth off and ask him. The next day. The television series was already midway through its broadcast. Lin Che's character was becoming more and more pitiful. A fair number of people came to Lin Che's Weibo page to vent their emotions. A lot of people felt that the character Chen Yian, which Lin Che played, was really having a very difficult time. She was considerate of others in every aspect, was easygoing and dashing, and never dragged things out no matter what she did. However, she turned out to get hurt in the end each time. In comparison, because the cruel events of late were all happening to Lin Che, all of the attention on the female lead had decreased drastically. Outside, people were starting to sensationalize and smear mud on Lin Che's name. They said that Lin Che was going to win the competition against the female lead and become the person who benefited most from this television series. Fortunately, on Mu Feiren's end, they pretended that this had not happened and made no response at all either. On the contrary, a sizable number of Mu Feiren's fans came to curse at Lin Che for no reason. As she looked at these comments, she was also slightly agitated. It's seriously weird. All of these things were written by the screenwriter. It has nothing to do with me. It's just because the important events in the plot recently are related to me. Ultimately, I'm still just a supporting role. Why did they all come to curse at me? Lin Che complained to Yu Minmin while they were on their way to attend a promotional activity. Yu Minmin looked at the documents in her hands. Since she had more experience, her reaction to things like this was a lot calmer than Lin Che's. Of course, she was not the one getting cursed at and she, in fact, did not get agitated as easily as Lin Che did. With everyone in the same production, it's inevitable that there'll be someone who hates to see you receive good reviews and will intentionally smear mud on your reputation. However, it's also not easy to investigate who it is. Everyone is a competitor, so it could be anyone. Investigating it will be of no damn use either. Yu Minmin looked at Lin Che. Anyway, just remember this. If you yourself become famous, that will be the greatest blow to your opponents. Lin Che nodded. I understand, Sister Yu. Very soon after, they arrived at the event venue. This was a talk show. The chief creators took this promotional activity very seriously because Mu Feiren was coming today as well. They hoped that Mu Feiren and Gu Jingze would become a hot topic, so they specifically arranged for Lin Che to go up on stage only later so she would not steal screen time from the female lead. Lin Che looked at Mu Feiren and Gu Jingze sitting together. When it came to work, the two of them were still very professional. They flirted with one another and really played their parts. Mu Feiren also proved herself to be a veteran. On stage, she appeared very relaxed and carried the flow of the program very well too. Right at this moment, Lin Li walked over to her from behind. She looked in front, snickered, and said, "Why did I hear that you're about to be suppressed?" Lin Che rolled her eyes and turned her head. "What nonsense are you spouting?" Lin Li looked at her with a face full of innocence. "Why, isn't that the case? I definitely heard that you insisted on generating hype with Gu Jingze because you wanted to get famous. Ultimately, the attention on you nearly suppressed the attention Mu Feiren got, so you offended Mu Feiren. Lin Che, I must say that you're too eager for quick success and instant benefits. Among these people who've been in the industry for long, which one of them doesn't have some backing? And which one of them doesn't have more tricks than you? Still, you insist on putting yourself above the female lead and the supporting roles in a television series. Can't you just properly play your supporting role?" Lin Che glared at Lin Li. She looked at her evil gaze and smiled coldly. "You really know it so clearly." Lin Li snickered. "Didn't you see? Even Mu Feiren didn't want you to generate hype with Gu Jingze today. She intentionally separated the two of you for the purpose of the interviews." Lin Che glared at her. She then saw Mu Feiren coming down. Lin Li rushed forward to welcome her. "Sister Feiren, you completed your earlier interview so well. Our company repeatedly instructed me to learn from you. They said that Sister Feiren is truly capable and even knows particularly well how to deal with reporters." Mu Feiren smiled faintly. "Honestly, I'm not. You're being too polite." Seeing that Mu Feiren was talking to her, Lin Li quickly smiled. She turned back to glare at Lin Che before moving even closer to curry favor with Mu Feiren. Lin Che only felt that she had enough of Lin Li. She glanced at her and did not speak. Then, Mu Feiren noticed Lin Che. She smiled as she walked over and said, "Lin Che, I didn't see you earlier." Lin Che quickly smiled. "Really, I was sitting here all along." Mu Feiren walked over and said warmly to Lin Che, "You performed pretty well in this television series. I think you're quite suited to play gallant roles like these." "Thank you for your compliment, Sister Feiren. Really, your performance was very natural. If Sister Feiren compliments me even more, my face will turn completely red." At this moment, the reporters caught the two of them chatting enthusiastically and quickly took pictures of them from afar. Mu Feiren said, "Gu Jingze has only ever complimented very few people. Earlier, he kept praising you. Tisk, tisk, Lin Che, you're probably one of the few people he looks at. His taste is so bad. Should I reflect on myself?" Mu Feiren began to laugh out loud. Lin Li looked on from behind and was furious. Just like this, Mu Feiren left her hanging dry here. However, she herself had gone directly to start chatting with Lin Che. Sure enough, news of this was released the next day. It stated that Mu Feiren was chatting enthusiastically with Lin Che, dispelling the rumors that they were not on good terms. Mu Feiren also publicly admitted that she felt that Lin Che was a very real and very simple-minded girl. And in the headlining photo, Lin Che and Mu Feiren were standing close to one another. At the back, Lin Li was completely reduced to a background figure. Upon seeing the headline, Lin Li was so angry that she nearly threw the tablet computer onto the ground. Do these reporters have brains? On the other hand, Yu Minmin looked at the news and said to Lin Che, who was still in the car, the reason why Mu Feiren can support you is probably because of Gu Jingze. Lin Che said, but why did she help me? First of all, she probably doesn't hate you. Otherwise, she could have just rested on her laurels and simply let the outside world speculate. There's no need for her to waste her energy. You can tell that she still quite likes you from the fact that she was willing to help you. Secondly, she's originally not a person who likes to stir up trouble. Furthermore, she's an intelligent person. She won't allow others to make use of her for no reason. This time, it was obvious that someone was using her to taint your reputation, so of course, she wasn't happy. Lin Che nodded her head in understanding. Chapter 80. It feels good to be worshipped. There was nothing much recently. Rest more at home and take a look at these scripts. Yu Minmin proceeded to throw a huge pile of scripts at Lin Che. Looking at the pile, she quietly asked, what are all of these? Yu Minmin said, these are for roles we hope you'll play. We're still looking. You can browse them and if there's any that interests you, let me know. Wow, so many, Lin Che exclaimed in surprise. Yu Minmin smiled and replied, these are not even all of them. The ones we selected for you are all top female lead roles. They won't go wrong. Top female lead? Yes, I'm not giving you supporting roles anymore. The first step was a supporting role. Now, it's time for the next step, which is to make you a lead actress in a television drama for you to shine. Thus, these scripts are very important. Take your time to pick. The pair walked side by side. Yu Minmin's phone suddenly rang. Yu Minmin looked at the number and her expression subtly changed. She turned to smile at Lin Che and then walked ahead to answer the call on her own. Dad, what's wrong? Daughter, my good daughter. I have decided to turn over a new leaf. All these years, I have let you down. I let you and your brother suffer. I'm going to quit gambling from now on. Yu Minmin listened to the solemn vows on the phone and curled her lips in a smile. Tell me. How much did you lose this time? How much money do you want me to give you? Not much, really. This time, I got cheated by someone. During the last game. I'm not interested in your stories. Just tell me the result. How much do you owe? 30,000. 30,000. Dad, that's a few months' worth of my salary. My daughter, your father only has you. You have to help me. Otherwise, they're going to use your mother to clear the debt. Yu Minmin took a deep breath, for Mom. Dad, I'm only doing this for my mom and brother. Please leave them alone, will you? Can you divorce Mom? Are you still my daughter? Yu Minmin hung up. When she returned outside, Lin Che noticed that Yu Minmin looked a little flustered. She asked, Sister Yu, are you okay? Yu Minmin smiled, I'm okay, I just have personal matters. Go back and look at the scripts. I won't send you off. Lin Che nodded as her gaze fell on Yu Minmin. Sister Yu, I feel that you're rather mysterious sometimes. What? Yu Minmin laughed. Lin Che said, I've worked with you for so many years but I've never heard you mention anything about your family or your personal life as a matter of fact. Everybody says you're a workaholic. Yu Minmin looked at Lin Che, and I have never told anyone that you're Lin Li's sister and a lady from the Lin family. Lin Che panicked and she quickly looked down, laughing dryly. I always felt that there's nothing much to say about that. There's no point. It's better if I fight for myself and get away from those people in the past. Yu Minmin replied, and that is why I've always liked you, you're not vengeful. What you said is right. There's no point in saying anything, so neither have I. Remember, this society doesn't applaud failure. I never let others carry what I can carry myself. I don't want to burden others when they already have their own problems. And I don't want to add salt to my wounds. Yu Minmin waved her hand for Lin Che's car to pick her up. Lin Che turned back and looked at Yu Minmin. She was walking back into the building. Her back view looked somewhat lonely while she always put on a strong, unwavering front. It was so drastically different. Lin Che took her pile of scripts home. Gu Jingze saw that Lin Che was carrying something and asked for someone to help her. What are these? Gu Jingze asked. Lin Che replied, the company is letting me choose scripts. Gu Jingze gingerly picked one up. The title read, Golden Affections. What a terrible name. Lin Che sat on the sofa and poured the scripts on the table, casually flipping through them. Gu Jingze sat on the other side and also took the scripts to see. I'll help you see, Gu Jingze offered. You can choose from all of these. Yes. Lin Che looked at him silently. Do you know what to look for in all of these? Gu Jingze said, I have a master's degree from McGill College. Quote. Lin Che replied, literature and acting are completely different. But they're both arts, there must be something in common. Lin Che held her scripts and raised her head to look at Gu Jingze with curiosity, but why would a bronze-stinking businessman like you study literature? Gu Jingze said without looking up, I also have a PhD from Harvard Business School, a master's degree from Yale School of Psychology and Law, and I studied management and economics at MIT. It's too bad that I only had enough time to get a bachelor's degree. Quote. Lin Che raised both her hands up at him, her face filled with admiration. Oh, you philomath. Let me bow down to you. Gu Jingze raised his head. Philomath. Lin Che said, it's someone who likes to study. Gu Jingze replied, I see. Lin Che asked curiously, but how could you learn so many things with such little time? Doesn't university take 4 years? How did you study everything? Gu Jingze said, don't you know? There are some universities that allow you to study more than one course at a time. But what's the point of studying so much? Everything is naturally of use. It's better to know some stuff. I don't get it. Indeed, because of your brain's capacity. You won't get it. Hey, Gu Jingze. I'm a university graduate myself. You graduated from university? Gu Jingze looked at her incredulously. Lin Che asked, didn't you say you checked my entire background before we got married? My assistants didn't report that kind of unnecessary information to me. Did that mean her education was unnecessary? Lin Che said spitefully, I graduated from theater school. It's also a legitimate major. Oh, really? Gu Jingze raised an eyebrow. Lin Che felt a little guilty. Of course I graduated. Really? Then how much was your scholarship worth? Lin Che felt even more guilty. She pursed her lips and thought of what to say. Gu Jingze smiled and said, it looks like you didn't pass, after all. No way. My graduation score was 61 points. It's a pass. Gu Jingze raised his brow. 61 points. Lin Che, you're such a poor student. Lin Che took a while to realize that he was making fun of her. Aren't you a cunning businessman? Don't you like cunning businessmen like me? Gu Jingze inched closer to her, wanting to reach across and pinch her face. The truth was that he did not scorn her results. He just thought that it was more fun to provoke her. It was her admiring look that made him burst with vanity. It made him feel good.